some tears out of me at the end. I was like, potentially reading is a little bit asexual. I love to see it. Couldn't care less about most of the husbands though. I'm trying not to see this as a terrible bury your gaze. Hey everyone, my name is Maddie and welcome to my first readathon vlog. I've decided this weekend that I'm going to try and read all of Taylor Jenkins Reid's backlist. It's a Taylor Jenkins readathon. Daisy Jones and the Six was my favourite book of last year. I flew through it, I loved the characters, I loved the style, and there are so many other books by this author that I'm missing out on. The one everybody knows about is Evelyn, Hugo, which was a big book in 2017, but I don't hear much buzz for her earlier works. I've decided that I'm going to work through them all in publication order, so that means the first book of the day is Forever Interrupted. This tells the story of Elsie, who 2 weeks ago married the love of her life, Ben, and then he goes out to get her some cereal one morning and doesn't come back. He's been in a car accident, he dies. She then has to grapple with the fact that her whole life has fallen apart. All the plans that she made aren't going to come true, and she has to meet Ben's mother Susan, who she hadn't been introduced to in the 6 months that they were dating. I was really surprised in starting this book how much I already felt for Elsie and could experience her emotions secondhand. In the first chapter, you just see her and Ben chatting together, being excited about the fact that they're married, and then the accident happens. So as a beginning, you don't get that much narrative time to understand how much Elsie and Ben love each other and become invested in their relationship before it just blows apart in front of you. But the emotion of Elsie was so raw that you had no choice but to feel sad even though you didn't know Ben. From that point, the book follows the pattern of going back and telling you about their relationship from start to end, and often that's triggered by experiences and conversations that Elsie is having in the present that remind her of something of Ben in the past. In 200 pages, the women are still very hostile towards each other, so I'm assuming that the second half of the book will be a reparation of their relationship, or at least the beginning of one. And although this book has a very sad premise, it's not all doom and gloom. I found the flashback scenes with Elsie and Ben so charming, and I love her relationship with her best friend Anna. She's just that classic supportive best friend that you find in rom-coms, and I'm really glad that Elsie has someone like that who is non-judgmental of how much emotion she's going through. I really hope that the other books aren't this sad. And I'm finished with Forever Interrupted, and it got some tears out of me at the end. I was like sobbing a little bit how heartwarming it was to see the relationship between Elsie and Susan develop. One of the penultimate scenes is where they go to Ben's grave together and tell him everything they wish for the future for themselves. Oh, and it just broke me. So part 2, Susan has a personality transplant basically, and apologizes for treating Elsie the way she did, so dismissively, so aggressively, and they're just immediately on the page of wanting to become friends and be there for each other in a way that nobody else can. Disappointingly, the friendship with Anna kind of slopes off as she falls in love with a man called Kevin, and Elsie kind of can't deal with seeing Anna in a really loved up relationship because it just shows her too much of what she doesn't have now that Ben's gone. So it's understandable and it is reconciled by the end, but everything I liked about the first half wasn't there in the second half, but it had other strengths. One of the main conflicts of the book is that Elsie doesn't have a copy of the marriage certificate. It never arrived and she doesn't follow up on it. She and Susan have conversations about what love means, because Susan is also a widow of her husband that she was with for over 40 years, and talking about love lost. I think it was just very concise. All of the emotions I think didn't drag out through the whole book. I think there was a real emotional arc for each of the characters in a way that you knew that they would be okay by the end. You felt safe leaving them there knowing that they could be happy again. It did really get me thinking about the concept of marriage and the value that it adds to a relationship, because ultimately if you know you love someone, you don't need a piece of paper to prove that. And there was also this cute little subplot with this old man that came to the library that Elsie was working at, kind of similar to the relationship in Autumn really. Why am I so endeared by relationships between women in their late 20s and elderly men in the same way that it goes about in The Holiday between Kate Winslet and the old man that lives next to her in LA. I think that dynamic is so cute, the wisdom and wholesomeness that gets between that specific pairing of people. So I really liked this one. It was a great start to the Taylor Jenkins readathon. It is day 2 and I am halfway through After I Do, which is the second book that Taylor Jenkins Reid wrote. It is a direct contrast to Forever Interrupted. It tells the story of Lauren and Ryan, whose marriage is falling apart, and so they decide to have a year where they're separated. They're not allowed to text or call or basically interact with each other at all in that time, to see whether at the end they want to get back together and if their marriage marriage is worth saving. Kind of similarly to Forever Interrupted, the first part is about flashing back and steadily gets you up to present day, where you see where they first meet and where they have all of their chemistry and where they seem really suited to one another. And then slowly, as the years tick on, it starts to fall apart between them. Little arguments explode into big things, and they just slowly grow to hate each other. It's awkward, but also real at the same time. I'm so used to seeing the wedding as like the end. This book is on the nose, talking about after I do, what happens once you are wed and committed to this person, whether you can actually live with them for your whole life. It's also interesting that Forever Interrupted kind of stopped short of that. They said I do, but they didn't get an after. It's interesting to think whether Elsie and Ben would have gone on the same path as Lauren and Ryan. I'm enjoying this one just as much, but the tone is very different. Although still kind of dealing with grief as a subject. Rather than a person dying, it's the love that's died. Part 2 was about talking to other people in their life and admitting that they had separated. And then Lauren had stumbled across some drafts of emails that Ryan had been writing to her, but not sent. So she reads them through, and it's all of his unfiltered, honest opinions about what he didn't like about her. And then that part ends with one of the emails that she's kind of not supposed to be seeing because she's hacked his email. Although, is it hacking if you know the password? One of the emails that he's hesitating on sending her is the fact that he's met someone else. And that completely changes the dynamic of this year apart, because up until this point, they haven't really been interacting with other romantic interests. At the moment, I don't have high hopes that Lauren and Ryan will get back together at the end of this book. I think that a year will give them time to realise that there are other people that can make them more happy, and I think maybe that's what's being hinted at by the fact that Lauren's mum has started dating someone new and she is just about to turn 60. So like, love can find you at any age and there's someone out there for everyone, even if you've had multiple loves. But definitely a different rumination on marriage and love compared to the first book. I just finished After I Do and it ended happily. I'm so surprised that it ended happily, that they came to the realisation that they needed each other. Subsequent 2 parts are where you think that Lauren has moved on. She also starts dating a man called David, who is in a similar situation to her in the fact that he has broken up with his wife after she cheated on him just once, and so they connect over the fact that they're lonely and missing someone, so they have like a no strings attached kind of relationship, and that's nice that they can use each other to learn the true value of their previous relationships. And then there's a lot of subplot with Lauren's family, and I loved what a large aspect of the plot this was. One of my favourite characters was Rachel, Lauren's younger sister. Throughout the book, she's the only person that Lauren interacts with that isn't in a relationship, and they have this conversation where Lauren says that that's not actually one of her priorities in life. She's not interested in having children or getting married, and Lauren has to unpick the kind of prescriptive mentality she has about how life moves on with those as milestones. Potentially reading is a little bit asexual. I love to see it. Also, their youngest brother, Charlie, has a one-night stand with a woman who then becomes pregnant. That's another relationship dynamic that's really interesting because they don't know that much about each other and yet they're willing to commit to marriage and again challenge Lauren's idea of what marriage means. I just thought it was really lovely and hopeful and kind of unexpected the way the book was building. I thought it would have a more cynical approach, and the ultimate lesson that they learn is that communication is the most important part of any relationship, and as soon as that breaks down, then you don't really have a chance. So they're just going to be more honest with each other about what they want. Which seems like a pretty easy conclusion to come to, but very happy for them. I didn't actually read any blurb or synopsis before diving into Maybe in Another Life, so I've stumbled across a sliding doors situation. So the book follows Hannah, who in New York City was dating a man that was married, and then the wife finds out, so she decides that she's going to go back to her hometown in LA. Also, all of TJL's books so far have taken place in LA, and I'm feeling like I'm getting quite the lay of the land, so who knows, if the rest of her books are set there, I might as well move. In LA, she's staying with her high school best friend Gabby and her husband Mark because her parents and sister live in London because her sister got accepted into the Royal Ballet School over there, or I guess for me over here. The timeline split that Hannah experiences is decided by whether she spends the rest of the evening with Gabby or she stays out with her high school sweetheart Ethan, who she's always had a soft spot for, although they both think that the other is to blame for the relationship falling apart when they were in their teens. The Hannah that goes back with Gabby ends up getting into a car accident, breaking a lot of of her bones, damaging the bottom half of her body, and ends up in hospital. There, she is told that she was pregnant and lost the baby in the accident, and it seems like some romantic feelings are budding for the guy that works the night shifts at the hospital there. And then in the Ethan timeline, they stay together and they start their relationship up again, and it feels like everything's going swimmingly, but then she is still pregnant. So I've just got to the bit where she is finding out that she's pregnant in that timeline, so that's a huge split for the book. Both setups are really juicy, but I feel like I'm already leaning towards the one where she's in hospital. But again, Taylor Jenkins Reid really knows how to write a strong female friendship, so I'm loving that between Hannah and Gabby in both timelines. Gabby is coming out on top regardless. I've finished Maybe in Another Life, and it might be my favourite one so far. I'm just such a sucker for the alternate timeline story and happy endings. Like literally every book has ended happily. I'm kind of waiting for like what's going to be the cursed book that doesn't have, or maybe that's just a trope of her writing that everyone will end up satisfied by the end no matter how dire things look in the middle. So I think I said in my last clips that I had a preference towards the storyline where she was in the car accident and is falling for her night nurse, but by the end of the book I think I liked both of them equally. They had the same strengths, and that strength was Gabby. I was right to call her the best character. The female friendship is so strong. It's probably the best and nicest I've ever read. And especially seeing it in like this adult friendship as well. I'm so used to seeing good friendships portrayed in YA, but to have it translated to women that are in their early 30s, I loved seeing that bond. Something devastating that happens in both timelines is that Abby's husband Mark is cheating on her. She finds out directly in the timeline where Ethan and Hannah are together, and then slowly it unravels in the hospital timeline where she puts it together that Mark is spending so long away from her. Mark is the bad guy in both timelines, but I'm pleased that in both Gabby knew what was going on and could choose a happier life for herself. I've got to like the Ethan timeline because Hannah gets this cute little dog called Charlene and she decides to keep the baby, and there's some conversations with her and Ethan about him being the father and him not being ready for that, but he has the same kind of commitment to love as Ryan and Ben did in Taylor Jenkins Reid's previous books, because ultimately he does decide that yeah, he wants to be with Hannah and he's not going to lose her again, and that's just romantic and cute and makes my heart swell. But I think that romance is offset by the fact that in another storyline they're not together and they're happy with other people, and Henry is the better choice. Again, their hospital courtship was so lovely. I liked the whole there's more than one person for everyone, the kind of thing that I was expecting to happen in After I Do. Also, the epilogue is Gabby falling in love with her high school sweetheart Jessie. They got married, like Hannah's going to have more children with either one of her love interests, but that section is probably the most repetitive, where they're making the same points in both chapters about fate and like you're meant to be on the path that you're on. I was kind of expecting, like Sliding Doors, for there to be a moment where the timelines converged again and you realised which one was like the real timeline, but I kind of appreciated at the same time that that didn't happen, because ultimately it doesn't matter, like she's happy in both. So I'm going to put this one as my favourite, and then Forever Interrupted, and then After I Do. Maybe. A very tentative ranking because I kind of like them all equally. So now it's time to move on to One True Loves, which basically follows the storyline of the last season of Jane the Virgin. This is a chance to right the wrongs of that season and have the man that I wanted to win? I don't know, win Jane's heart, I guess. Who knows? It's Raphael and Michael all over again. Ah, Jane the Virgin. Kind of got disappointing at the end, didn't it? So I've made it halfway through One True Loves. This is the story of Emma, and I've realised that Taylor Jenkins Reid's characters can be split into two categories: big boobs or big butt. Those are like the two characteristics, physical characteristics, that will always get mentioned. So you're either a busty blonde or like a pear-shaped brunette. So the two men in her life are Jessie, her high school sweetheart. They're together through their college years, then they get married, and the day before their first wedding anniversary, Jessie is in a helicopter accident over in Alaska, and so he's presumed dead. Sam is the other man, and Emma also knew him whilst at high school, but they never had a shot together. They just worked in their family bookshop. Then once Jessie dies and Emma comes back to her hometown, she reacquaints herself with Sam, and they realise that they still have so much chemistry, and so for the last couple of years they have been falling in love with each other. Sam proposed, so she was engaged, and that definitely complicates things when Jessie returns. I've just had her first meeting with Jessie, and he is still convinced that they're married, that she is his life, and she was the main reason why he wanted to survive, to come back after years of being stranded on this tiny little island playing out Castaway. Sam has decided that he wants to call off the wedding until she decides who she wants to be with, because he doesn't want to be with someone that doesn't want to choose him. Which, fair enough, you know, he's stopping himself from being pied off early, but I really can't tell who she's going to choose because she has chemistry with both men. Like, they're both her true loves, as the title would suggest. In classic Taylor Jenkins Reid fashion, we've had flashbacks establishing the relationship between Jessie and Emma when they were 14 and as they got older. I didn't really find them as charming as the other couples. I'm rooting more for Sam because I like his energy more. I think he's just so sweet and understands Emma. Yeah, it seems more like a quiet passion between them, whereas with Jessie and Emma it's more intense. Although I do think it's a very interesting contrast to Maybe in Another Life, where Hannah was living like two separate timelines at different times. Emma is living them at the same time. Also, I'm just getting all of their names confused, all the ladies, because they're just like your basic normal names, you know, top 10 baby girl names. Emma is this one. Hannah was Maybe in Another Life. The first one was Elsie, Forever Interrupted was Elsie, and After I Do, gone. Sarah. Jane? That's really going to annoy me. Why can't I get it? Lauren. There we go, Lauren. I am straight off the back of finishing One True Loves, and she chose who I wanted her to choose. I think this was a really simple story about loving someone again after previously loving someone and having that love not detract from your first. The second half of the book was about Jessie and Emma trying to reconnect, see if they still had something. I guess kind of like the opposite of the After I Do year apart that they had to spend like a weekend together to see if they still had chemistry and still loved each other. And it was obvious that they had grown apart. The book is actually only about 260 pages, so a concise story, but again, just like all her other books, everybody got their happy ending. But ultimately I don't have much to say about this one. I don't think it was as complex as I wanted it to be, so I think this is going down as like my least favourite of the four, but it's still a favourite. I found these books consistently entertaining and fun. My final book of this challenge was The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I think this is the culmination of all of the Taylor Jenkins Reid tropes that I've seen so far. We've established that she loves a flashback scene from the beginning to the end of a relationship, and that's essentially all this book is. A really, really long flashback into Evelyn's entire life. Unlike her other historical biography style book, Daisy Jones, this one you can see the mechanism of the biography more. Like, you get zoomed out sections where we're not in Evelyn's past, we're with the reporter Monique, and she's a character in her own right. And one of the biggest mysteries of this book is not actually the husbands or the fact that Evelyn has a secret wife. It's the relationship that Monique has with Evelyn and why she was chosen to tell her story. It's split into 7 parts telling you about the 7 husbands, but about one husband in, we're introduced to Celia St. James. This is Evelyn's biggest love interest. And I guess interest is taking it quite literally because she's the most interesting character in the book. The dynamic between them is so lovely. They're navigating an LGBT/queer space in the 1960s to 1990s, obviously through the lens of fame, where it's very difficult to come out. There's a lot of homophobia. Something I really loved about the book is that Evelyn was so diehard about being labelled bisexual rather than lesbian. It's cool to have that distinction and have her fighting for it. And the relationship that she had with Celia did keep me reading. Couldn't care less about most of the husbands though. The first husband she just marries for convenience to get herself to LA. The second husband is her first big co-star. She does a lot of romance films with him and it's going well for them, but then he gets abusive, so she's like, no thank you. So glad she could escape that into the arms of Celia. That's around the time we meet her. Third husband, who's the third husband? Who's the third one? I can't remember. See, this is the thing, I think they all blur a little bit. Like, maybe there are like 4 significant husbands and then the other 3 are kind of like, you know, take it or leave it, you could forget them. A toss-up for my favourite husbands are between Harry and I think his name was Robert, the one she married last. Harry is Evelyn's kind of agent/manager, I think that's around the term. Producer, maybe? He does all of those things. He cares for Evelyn from the very beginning, gives her roles, they have a great friendship between them. And Harry is gay himself, so they have another kind of marriage of convenience where they can both be in their queer relationships and it can go under the radar to the press. The sad thing is, everybody that Evelyn ever cares about ends in tragedy. It wouldn't be a Taylor Jenkins Reid book without a tragic accident of some kind that either results in massive injury or death. Who knew that car crashes were going to be such a theme across all of these? My Kindle doesn't want me to know this either. It's like the husbands are irrelevant. Maybe you don't need their names. He was one of the better husbands. He deserves a name check. Robert, I was right. Robert Jameson was her last husband and the brother of Celia. She married him so that she could gain Celia's estates when Celia died. I'm trying not to see this as a terrible bury your gays, you know? Like, that's not the ending I wanted for this book. I feel like Robert is the culmination of other male leads that we've seen in Taylor Jenkins Reid. Again, he's filling the role of a father for a child that isn't his, as Ethan would have had to do in maybe in another life, and very similarly to Lauren's brother in After I Do. But I think I just felt so disconnected from the book a lot of the time. It took me so many sessions to read it. I was more invested actually in Monique's storyline, that I wanted more time to be taken about her, but you have to have Evelyn tell her whole life story before you realise what's relevant. And I think those last 20 pages where you finally put it together, why it's happening now, is a really rewarding payoff. As per my categories from One True Loves, Evelyn fits into the busty blonde type. The amount of times her boobs are referenced. And then trying to make a point that she and her family have like breast cancer in their history, like her symbol of hypersexuality and femininity is what kills her in the end. Like, no, I wasn't having that as a statement. Ultimately, I think this book flip-flops between wanting the characters to have a happy ending, because most of what happens between Evelyn and Celia is actually super lovely, and giving it all this tragedy in Harry and the abusive husbands. Can't believe there has to be multiple. So if anything, this is kind of like the saddest book of the collection so far. Also, shout out to Taylor Jenkins Reid for always showing like autumn romances for women. All of her other characters have either been like late 20s, early 30s, and Evelyn, as this 80-year-old woman talking about the loves of her whole life, means that for the majority of this book, she's talking about her like middle-aged life from 40 onwards, and she's with Celia most prominently when she's in her 50s, and it was a point that she's made in previous books that love is for any age. I really liked Evelyn's career trajectory and the kind of films that she was acting in, how revolutionary they were. I thought it was cool to see from Monique's perspective how they had stood the test of time. So you heard about it, like why Evelyn thought it would be radical to do, and then seeing how like through history that was true. I think the mix between the past and the present was done really well. So my final thoughts on the Taylor Jenkins Reid backlist that I read in this video. Number one pick is going to be Maybe in Another Life. This is my favourite, and as long as you don't take a shot every time they mention cinnamon rolls, then I think you'll have a fantastic time reading it. I loved the female friendship, I loved the two love interests, and I genuinely just liked the characters of this book the best of any. Second would be Forever Interrupted. I thought that was a really fun debut book. It was emotional, it hit my heart in all the right places, and I love this generational relationship. The next three books are kind of muddy for me, because even though I said I probably didn't enjoy the reading experience of Evelyn Hugo as much, I think I'm still going to put her third on this list, because the other two rom-coms, now that it's been like a week since I've read them, they don't stand out in my mind as much as the other two, and Evelyn I think is going to be one that I remember quite a bit. So Evelyn is going in this lovely third spot, and then I think I'm going to put After I Do and then One True Loves last. I never expected when I started this readathon to read about a man biting off his own fingers in these books, but that was an experience that One True Loves gave me. Let me know in the comments down below if you have read any Taylor Jenkins Reid books, which ones were your favourite, what you thought about Evelyn, because I'm assuming that's the one that most people have read, and if you're interested in picking up any of these backlist books if you've never heard of them before. I had so much fun doing this, and I've got Malibu Rising on pre-order, so I will be doing its own reading vlog of that one, because, you know, that's what I did this for. I want to be able to say that I've read all of her books, and I'll see you next time. Hello, magpie. It's looking right at me. With both eyes. What are you trying to tell me? Oh my god, we're making so much eye contact. I've never made this much eye contact with a magpie before.